Right, okay. It's quite sobering, I think, really, to think about the complexity of the global food chain that could underlie something as simple and everyday as a pizza. It's quite a shock when you appreciate those kinds, the kind of background to something like that we think of, we eat every day. A simple question, but I'm not sure that it has a simple answer, which is, how far is it possible to quantify risk in this field? And if it is possible to quantify it, would you say that the risks that we commonly face are on the increase or declining, going up or going down?
I think specifically to answer your first part of the question, which is can we quantify the risk, I suppose my own background, my own research area is quantitative risk assessment. Primarily I work in microbial quantitative risk assessment, and we have managed, partly funded through these traceability projects, to do formal quantitative risk assessment of a number of specific pathogens in specific products. So kind of classic, I use the word classic, but quantitative risk assessment is not particularly old science. I think the very first published paper in this area goes back to about 1998. But in that kind of whatever 14-year time period, I think if you look into the published domain, partly contributed by the projects being showcased here today, there is kind of quite a considerable number of quantitative risk assessments published, as I said, for these product pathogen or product contaminant type contamination. So we can technically do it. Now the challenge is those projects tend to be quite complex, tend to be quite expensive. So to nearly quantify it, some of those initial ones where we looked at pathogens in, let's say, specific pathogens, some of the pathogenic E. coli, for instance, in beef products, the cost per product, cost per risk assessment was in the order of hundreds of thousands of euros, and took some time, possibly as long as 2 years, to do it. So we have the tech, we can do it. It is expensive. We're probably speeding up the process. So, for instance, one of the projects highlighted today, which is ProSafe Beef, within that we are developing a quantitative risk assessment protocol, which we can hopefully go across not just single pathogen product combinations, but over multiple pathogen product combinations. So, in itself, that's some development in this area. I've forgotten the second bit of your question.
Is it on the rise or is it falling?
Oh yeah. Well, in terms of risk, this is, I have to apologise, Chair, and to the participants here. I'm going very much from memory now. But let's say if you take the example of the pathogenic E. coli in beef products, kind of risk is sort of that comes out, and essentially what the risk is, an individual eating an undercooked burger. And also then, there's always kind of a number of risks conspire together to give you illness, and then so that person then goes on, consumes that burger, and then translates into illness. That risk is in the order of about 1 in a million. So 1 to the 10 to the minus 6, or to put it the other way, 1 serving in a million, you may have an illness event. Yeah. I suppose we in quantitative risk assessments know in Ireland we have a lotto, and we have a lotto twice a week, as it happens. So it's on a Wednesday night and on a Saturday night. And the kind of joke we have within the quantitative risk assessment community is the lotto is whatever is on what day are we of the week today? I've nearly forgotten.
Tuesday.
Tuesday, thank you. So we'll have a lotto on the Wednesday. There will be a lotto. So the next one then will be on a Saturday. So never to buy your ticket on the Thursday, because there's a higher probability of being dead by the Saturday evening than to win the lotto. So always wait just before the event to buy your lotto. So it's a kind of a completely aside, but I think it raises a very important issue here in terms of risk and risk communication that we touched upon earlier in the afternoon. That I think there's a huge effort in terms of really the kind of final frontier here is the communication of this message to consumer. Yeah. At the end of the day, will always be a latent residual risk associated with foodstuffs. Yes, We've seen that over the summer. no, I mean, but there's just countless. So I think we have to try and put these type of risks, move away from the 1 in a million, which we as kind of technical people, I'm an engineer, we can attempt to quantify, but to communicate that message out into the, no, I mean, to the ultimate people here, which are consumers.
Well, communicating anything to do with risk in any field is one of the most difficult things. People have a very strange perception of risk, actually, and very often you just say 1 in a million. People don't really know what that means.
Exactly, precisely.
Yeah. But as a general, sorry, just one thing. Just as a general rule, I would have imagined that the more complex the food chain, the harder it is to quantify, and the less reliable the risk assessment you get at the end. Would that be true?
Yes, and in a sense, we've, no, I mean, again, as a quantitative risk assessment community, we've probably picked off the low-hanging fruit,
right,
I mean, where we have, no, I mean, single products and an identified risk. Let's say a pathogen in a meat product, for instance.
Yes.
But come back to my opening example of the pizza. I mean, there to attempt a formal quantitative risk assessment, I think would I wouldn't like to try it.
Quite so. Yes. So you wanted to add something to that?
I mean, can I say? I mean, it's perfectly practical to quantify risks. I don't think there is a barrier to quantifying risks. What it's really, really difficult to do and leads to all kinds of problems is to compare two risks. That's a really difficult process because we don't have a nice, simple scale for risks. And most of us, when we compare things, we judge where things are on a scale. If one's to the right of the other, it's bigger. That's not true of risks because they're multidimensional and so they occupy a big space. So if you ask me, is food safer now than it was in 1911, I would rather eat my today's. But that question alone and my answer to that illustrates why the question is really difficult, because we're not comparing like with what I eat now and what I eat in 1911. I mean, if you actually look at the list of agents that we consider in our risk assessments, that can be considered in risk assessment, there are lots of lists that are published. And that list changes over time. And it changes in lots of different ways.
Yes.
And so, in 1911, if I could have got cholera or botulism or whatever, not very nice, but I couldn't have got campylobacteriosis because it didn't exist in 1911. Okay. Whereas most countries in Europe, campylobacteriosis is the one that causes most cases now. So we can't really compare those things. But actually, that emergent property of hazards is actually not the only way in which the number of risks is increasing. Possibly far more concern to a mathematician now is something called disaggregation. If I go back only 10 years, perhaps 20 years, E. coli appeared on the list once. But now we all know what VTEC means and EHEC means and so on. We've disaggregated that list in terms of agents and risks. And actually keeping account of all of those and making comparisons makes the situation very difficult.
There's one other question I'd like to ask. So I don't want to preempt anyone in the audience who might have one. Has anyone got anything that they want to ask? If not, no. In that case, which is back to this issue that keeps coming up again and again, implementation. And the extent to which there is any kind of a sort of difficulty about getting ideas implemented in your field. Is this a problem for you?
I mean, I would agree with a comment this morning that there is a certain level of standardisation and requirement for most people who make decisions to make decisions based on certain standards. And introducing new standards is a difficult thing to do. And that's why I said, while I was speaking, actually providing people with an incentive is the right thing, the right approach from my point of view, and make them feel that by doing something that they're helping themselves rather than something else. And I think biotracing certainly does that. It gives people a feel that they've got more control of what they're doing, and in that way that they're competitive against people who don't have that control.
Okay. Oh, yes. Do you want to add something? Yeah.
Well, yeah. No, I would like maybe to return to the comment I made in the course of my presentation about access to data that has been generated, particularly in the public arena by the regulatory authorities, by food safety organisations. I think we can make robust movement forward here because, at one level, these type of assessments must be done on the individual product. But I think we can make robust progress forward in terms of, and particularly to assist people like SMEs, which was common during the day. The majority of our food within Europe is coming from the SME groupings. I think there's, essentially to group our products. So there are, for instance, if you think dairy products, we can start to group those together, consider the kind of common links associated with all dairy products, and assist SMEs then to move forward. And I think again we have a role by, at central level, by regulatory authorities, food safety authorities, to assist the SME at that level. I think the larger organisations, the multinational organisations, can resource these type of activities themselves. But at local level, at smaller level, I think there's a debate there needed. No. How do we drive that process? Yeah. We've seen that already at a very simplistic level in terms of rolling out HACCP into the food industry. That was, at multinational level, that was no problem. But there's still a residual cohort there, small-scale producers, which are struggling to grasp some of the simple concepts associated with HACCP, even though essentially it is mandatory within the European Union for whatever the last 5 or 6 years now.
Right, well, I think that takes us to the time to move on. Thank you very much for that.